Hey everybody, Scott Marsh here with another episode of All Things Music. Today I have a very special guest here, Dr. Galen Karriker. It's very nice to be here in his office at University of Akron. He's the director of bands here at the University of Akron, so thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate
it. Just to give you a little bit of background about Galen. So he got his bachelor's in music education at LSU. He went on to get his master's in music at Michigan State. He did some teaching at University of Wisconsin-Madison. For how many years were you there?
5 years.
5 years. And then he came to University of Akron, was the director of athletic bands.
Yes, sir.
And then he took a little sabbatical and some time off, and he went back to Michigan State and got his doctorate in conducting. Yep. And then came back and worked his way up, and now he's the director of bands here at U of A. So we're very excited to have him on today, especially for this. He's going to have some good information for you folks out there. Today we're going to be talking about college music auditions. So for those of you who are going to be, working your way towards music auditions this year and in the future, hopefully we're going to be able to give you some good information and insight on what to expect, what you should prepare for, and some other thoughts along the way. So we're going to dive right in. We've prepared some questions for you.
All right, sounds good.
So the first one here is just if there are not specific requirements for you to play, which some colleges probably have a couple specific things they want you to play, what should you play, right? How do you choose your literature that you're going to audition on?
Well, absolutely, and I agree with you that some universities, I think you have to check on their website because I think there are often specific guidelines about what they want you to play. But, ultimately, I think for a player, you want to demonstrate both sides of your musical personality. What's your lyrical, expressive playing like? What's your technical facility like on your instrument? And so you need to select a solo and or an etude, probably two things. A lot of times they'll want a solo and then they'll want some sort of an etude out of one of the standard etude books that are going to allow you to demonstrate those things. And if it's a particularly long concerto, even if you prepare a large portion of something of the slow lyrical and a large portion of the technical, I think those things will work. Ultimately, I would say check with your band director or your orchestra teacher. It depends on what instrument you play, whether you're in the band or the orchestra or the choir. But I would check with your music teacher at your high school, and I would not be bashful about emailing or calling the professor that you might potentially study with at the university to say, here's what I'm thinking about preparing for my audition. Is this acceptable? Do you think this is the right way to go? And, here in Ohio, there's a large assortment of literature for the OMEA State Solo and Ensemble. Right. That's a great resource to go with. You can't go wrong there. So those would be my suggestions about what to prepare as far as that goes.
Right. Asking questions ahead of time, please don't be afraid to do that because that's the best way to get the answers you want, right? You'd rather be informed and ask too many questions than not know and maybe make a mistake in your choice. I'd also say that make sure you pick a technical and a lyrical side, right? Do those things, but be careful. You want to show what you have and show your range, but also don't put yourself in a situation where you're gonna potentially have not have success, right? So if there's something particularly that's a passage that's tripping you up at a certain piece that you're thinking about choosing, maybe put that one aside and work. They want to, they want to see you stretch, but they want to see you succeed as well.
Yeah, if the excerpt is going to stretch you beyond the boundaries of what you're capable of being successful, and it's going to highlight your weaknesses, then that's not probably the thing that you should put forth as your best efforts.
Right. They want to hear your strengths. Trust me, they'll hear the weaknesses, and they'll work on those. And that's their job, is taking you in as a student, is to help you work through those, through time at the university.
I would say one of the things, Scott, if you don't mind, is that from a timeline standpoint, I mean, we're filming this right now in late fall, and I would say if you haven't already communicated with a private teacher at a university that you're thinking about investigating, now's the time to get on this, because the auditions typically, we have an early audition in December, but most schools have their auditions in January and February, and at the latest in March, early March. Those are the ends, and by May 1, you've got to turn in your intent. You've got to sign the letter that says, I'm accepting a scholarship. So you don't want to be calling at the first of the year to ask a professor, hey, what should I prepare for my audition? Right. Because the professor's then going to know, hey, this student hasn't worked on this for very long. So you want to try to deal with those sorts of questions and inquiry in September, maybe even August, or maybe even in the summer, prior to the year that you're going to then be a senior and be pursuing the scholarship opportunity.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, moving on. scales, right? They're going to ask scales, right? So I'll tell you just this quick story. I was at an audition process once, and a student came in and probably, I don't want to say through no fault of his own, but I think that maybe he was not prepared well. Maybe his band director or his private lessons teacher did not prepare him well enough. And they went and asked him to play a scale, and he said, "Well, I know 2, and I don't know what the names are." So don't be that person,
Amen.
They're very important. So the question is how many or which scales should you know, and kind of what style or how should you be prepared to play them?
Well, I think if you're going to pursue music as a career, you're walking into an environment where I think there's an expectation that you know your 12 major scales. And I think you're better off if you can play them in 2 octaves, not just in 1 octave. I think that you exploring being able to play those scales at a quarter note tempo that maybe is ranging from 80, quarter note 100, quarter note 120, quarter note 144. So you're forcing yourself to play those at different tempos and being able to play all of those, and then ultimately also exploring different articulations. Let's play the entire scales all slurred. Let's play with legato tongue. Let's maybe slur between 2 notes and tongue 2 notes. Just various patterns so that you've made that part of your technique and your
right.
musical vernacular that's becoming second nature for you.
Right, because you never know what style or how fast they're going to ask you to play them.
Right.
And the other thing is that, and this is just something that I'll see young players try to learn their scales, and they try to play them very quickly. I would err on the side of playing them correctly versus too fast, right? So quality is probably a lot better than speed.
Yes, because
in this case.
Yeah, because I think anybody listening to an audition when you're playing scales is listening to, and I bet this would be the case for anything, the tone. Are you playing with a great characteristic tone,
right.
First and foremost? Do you have a good timbre that is the same in all the range of the instrument? Or does the timbre grow from dark to bright as you go from low to high? And ultimately, what's the pitch ability that you have as you play scales? Because, scales can really demonstrate a student's awareness or lack thereof of pitch tendencies on your instrument, and also an understanding of pitch tendencies within scales.
Right.
So I would encourage that. Certainly a chromatic scale 2 octaves isn't a bad one for you to have in your toolbox of musical tools.
Absolutely.
I think having knowledge of the minor scales in all 3 forms, whether it's natural, harmonic or melodic, I want to make sure I go through the progression the right way. I would say those are good for you to explore. I don't think everyone's going to want those.
Right.
I think, again, from what we talked about at the beginning, you ultimately want to seek, everybody's got a website now, so everybody's got a lot of information up. So go and seek that sort of information out to make sure you have that, but at least be making sure that you are comfortable with your 12 major scales and a chromatic scale, 2 octaves versus 1 octave.
Right.
I think that's going to set you up for better success than hoping that they only call on 1 or 2 or 3 of your traditional band scales.
Right.
That's not going to help you.
Right, exactly. All right, how important is sight reading in an audition?
Well, I would say that I am not as much a part of the auditions for scholarships. I've heard some, and I'm here a lot of times on the days that we have the scholarship auditions, but we use sight reading sometimes and quite often in our band auditions for chair placement. And I would say that a student may come in and play lights out on an excerpt that they've been working on, and then they go to sight read, and all of the preparation is taken away, and you can truly then see the depth of musicianship that a player has. You get to see exactly where they are from the standpoint of their rhythm, their articulation style, their ability to read and react to dynamics and phrasing, all of those layers, kind of the musical onion, so to speak.
Right.
All of that stuff gives you a glimpse into exactly what that player is all about and really where they are in their progression. And that can be a good thing. And as you know, that can be a deal breaker. That can influence a committee's decision of, boy, this student plays really well, but boy, the sight reading really revealed some remedial situations with either rhythm or any number of the things that I just listed, and there are more than those. But that could certainly set you back.
Right, because ultimately they have no idea how long you've been preparing the piece that you came and played, right? You could have prepared it for 3 months or a year. they don't really know. So sight reading gives them that overall glance of what can they do on the spot right now. And I personally feel that sight reading is one of the be-all to end-all. I will tell you that in the professional musical world, if you cannot sight read, your phone will not ring. You will not get called for a job.
Well, and I don't want to scare students that are thinking about doing the audition, because I'm sure some students right now are probably going, "Oh my boy, what do I do now? How do I figure that out?" Well, ask your band director if they've got some old etude books for your instrument.
Right.
Ask them if they've got some method books for your instrument that perhaps you're not using in the rotation with your band. Take one out, open it up, give yourself 60 seconds to look at it, put a timer on, and then put a metronome on. And read it, maybe not at performance tempo. Read it slow enough that you can try to really absorb all of the details that are in the music, and get all of the musical elements right as to the best of your ability the first time. And one great way to, I think, evaluate yourself is turn the recording device on, whether it's a video or an audio recording, and record yourself playing it. And then sit and listen to the recording and write down the things that you hear that don't line up with what you see.
Absolutely.
In the example. That's going to inform what your habits are and the things you need to work to break. And I think if you did that on a fairly regular basis, and were systemic about it with the approach, you don't have to be the world's fastest sight reader, but you might demonstrate to yourself that you can improve that aspect of your playing, and it's going to certainly help you.
Yeah.
Not just in the audition, but as a musician.
No, absolutely. Okay. Anything else that you should expect? When you just general thoughts on what should you expect?
You mean with the audition day?
The audition day, the process?
Well, I think for a lot of students, the arrival on campus is followed by some sort of an introductory remarks and session, and then, go warm up, and then we're going to have you play. I would suggest, depending on how far away you have to go and what time the day starts, maybe waking up early at home and doing your regular long warm-up at home in your space that you're comfortable in, and then going to the school means that when you then have warm-up time at the school to get ready for your audition, you're not in a mode of heightened anxiety with the adrenaline because, oh my gosh, I don't have time to go through my long tones and get myself to where my lip slurs are responding the way that I want them to when I have a really good long warm-up.
Right.
So give yourself a chance to do your warm-up that you normally function best with, maybe at home, so that when you arrive at school, because the time could be one of those, hey, all right, so you're here and you're ready, let's go ahead and have you play. And you may not, you just never know how some of those things are going to go. That would be one of the things I would say. Understand that you're going to play for a group of people, adults that you don't know, that you might be intimidated by. Don't misinterpret nonverbal communication from faculty. A faculty member on a Saturday might be having their first cup of coffee for the day and might look very disinterested. And on the inside, they may be incredibly interested in you, but you may perceive that they're not. Don't let that sort of stuff, influence in your mind what your commitment is to the music that you're trying to create. You go there with the mindset of, this is what I've prepared, this is what I'm going to commit to as a musician, and I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, it's great stuff. Some schools are going to have some entrance exams, some won't. But if there is a theory entrance exam, what should these young musicians expect? What should they know?
Well, I think for those students out there that I don't know about you, but there weren't APA theory classes when we were in school. Maybe there was for you.
Nope.
But I think a lot more students now have a theory class that their band director's teaching or one of the music teachers on staff is teaching. And so I think there's already a better threshold of students' knowledge coming in the door. If you don't have that, you can certainly look up some theory text online. You can look up some things on the internet. Ultimately, you're going to be tested on your ability to recognize note names, note symbols, rests, the various notation things in music. Do you know what those mean? I think there will probably be some sort of oral skills to ask whether or not you can hear the difference between a major third and a minor third, a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. I think your ability to look at key signatures in both treble and bass clef. So for all of my bass clef friends out there, if you're not knowledgeable about the the order of flats and sharps as they appear in the treble clef staff, which is the same. It's just different lines and spaces. Make sure you acquaint yourself with that.
Right.
I think that, symbols and musical terms, it's going to be basic rudimentary things. And I think for most schools, it is not a test that is exclusive. If you can't pass this test, you're not in. It's really a test that allows the faculty to determine, do we need to put you in a class to help get you caught up and get you strong enough to be ready to dive into Theory 1? Here at the University of Akron, and I predict some schools also probably do the same thing, we have an intro to music theory class for a student that maybe comes in and has some weaknesses. Mm-hmm. They take that first semester in the fall. Our first semester regular theory class, we also offer in the spring of the freshman year. Right. And then we offer Theory 2, which is the second semester theory class, we offer it in the summer. So that students that end up in that remedial refresher class, refresher is probably a better word than remedial.
Sure.
That those students can actually get themselves back on sequence by the start of the fall semester in the sophomore year.
In the sophomore year.
So,
yeah, that's good to know. And some other schools probably do similar things. It's just, again, just ask questions, right? You can always, email one of the theory professors at the university that you're, going to audition at and take a test and say, hey, I'm coming to take this test and just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on, some of the things I should prepare, to know. So,
and I don't think it's, if you haven't communicated with your band director or your choir director or whatever your instrument teacher is, hey, I'm thinking about being a music major, and you're in the middle of your senior year. First of all, we need to have that conversation. Second of all, you could ask your teacher that question. What should I look, what did you experience in your theory diagnostic test?
Absolutely.
Do you have any examples that you could write up for me and make a mock test for me? Nothing wrong with doing that. Here again, you put yourself in the situation where you're practicing that test environment before you're actually in a new environment at a university, worried about what's going to happen.
Right.
So
yeah, and we briefly talked before we start taping here about it's very rare, but some schools will throw a music history exam in there. Don't worry about those really. I think they're just trying to gauge your interest and gauge what you do know, if anything. Usually those are reserved for the graduate level.
That's what I predict. I mean, we don't have a music history diagnostic, and some schools might have it for the undergraduate level. Here again, there are lots of music history texts out there. One that was suggested to me many years ago that I have found to be good is, I think it's Hugh Miller. For sure, the last name is Miller. And it's called the Miller Music Outline. And it's an outline of music history in a digestible form. It's not all the tentacles of information that surround every period in music history and every composer and every thing that was created along the journey. But it allows you to have kind of a summary of here are the big events that occurred.
Sure.
For instance, when does sonata form come into being, and what are the key ingredients, and who are some key composers of that? I think knowledge of those sorts of big signature moments in the timeline of music history are going to set you up for success if you have to take a diagnostic like that.
Right. Okay. Some universities are going to ask you to take a basic piano test. Mm-hmm. Again, what should they know? How should they prepare?
Here again, it's one of those, if you haven't had piano and you have a friend that is taking some piano lessons and you can go and take some piano lessons, do it. The sooner you can get yourself acclimated to that instrument, the better. If you don't play the instrument and it's a week before you're doing the scholarship audition and you're watching this podcast and going, oh, now what? Look, one of the things we do with our diagnostic is we ask the student first and foremost, do you play piano? And if the answer is no, be honest. And if the student says no, we say, great, you're going to piano class 1.
Yeah, sure.
And so basically that's how we deal with that. So you don't need to worry about, I don't play piano, what am I going to do? You're going to take those classes at the university level. But if you can get yourself onto a keyboard, I certainly think it helps your overall musicianship.
Absolutely. So if you have an opportunity to, go ahead, but just tell them if you don't, you will spend time on the piano throughout your career at the university. So it's not a bad thing to start now and to start preparing for that stuff. So also some places are going to ask for some kind of a sight singing test. or a vocal test of some kind. So
I predict more of it will be the oral skills where you're hearing something played and you have to mark whether it's major or minor, triad, or what's the interval that you're hearing. We don't actually make the students sing,
okay.
at least the instrumentalists. Sometimes we might have them match a pitch. I've seen that done. Right. So, if you've not sung in choir, you don't have to. I think sometimes students perceive that I don't have a good voice. I've heard that statement said before. It's not about that. It's whether we can match pitch or not. Right. That's the thing. And everybody can hum. And so what I would say is go to the piano, play a note, try to hum that note. And if you open your mouth, you'll find that you are actually singing. Right. And as a wind player, you're using much the same air as you're singing as you do when you play the wind instrument. Not quite, but the idea is the same in terms of pitch recognition in the back of the ear. So right. I would say going to the piano and maybe taking either your method book. Now, if you play a transposing instrument, remember you need to understand how to transpose it to the keyboard, or asking your band director if they have a concert pitch method book that you could use, whether it's flute or trombone or an instrument like that that you could take and play an example and then sing that example. And then try singing something without actually playing it on the piano first. Right. Those would be good ways to train yourself in the event they ask you to do that. Ultimately, if you can train yourself to be able to match pitch and audiate it back, those are things that are going to, I think, help demonstrate what your oral skills and capabilities are. Right. Yeah. And it's so like he's saying, it's obviously more of an oral skill, just matching the pitch. And you also mentioned, prior that using a hymnal is a great tool as well to learn how to do that. So later in your career, you will be asked to, play one voice on the piano and sing another voice. Sure. So starting just scratching the surface of those skills. And you can do that with the hymnal. It's like, right. You could practice singing the soprano melody, and then you could practice singing the bass line, and then you could maybe sing the bass line while you play the melody, or vice versa. Right. Just things like that to expand your experience are going to be helpful for you. Right. I don't know that you're going to have to do that at the audition. Right. But I would ask that question. That way you know the answer to that before you walk in the door. Right. Again, ask the question. Yeah, I know there was a school, and at one time, BW, Baldwin Wallace here, did do a sight singing test for every incoming freshman. Yeah. There were conservatories, so maybe it's reserved for conservatories. I don't know, but I know some friends who went there and had that experience, and they weren't really prepared. Well, and we ultimately end up doing the sight singing test for us. The students actually have to do that as part of our music ed jury at the end of their second year. They have to do rhythm, sight rhythm, and sight singing. So that, if you don't do it for your entrance exam, it's still going to come along. Right. It will be there someday. So then, we're just going to kind of wrap things up with some final thoughts. We're going to just kind of spitball back and forth and see if there's anything else we want to mention. One thing we had talked about before, maybe we should mention, is the need for an accompanist. Not sure that you need an accompanist. I would ask. But I think for most places, I don't think that the preference is for you to have an accompanist. That may not be the case at the school you're interested. So be sure and ask that question so that you find out in advance whether or not you want that. I know that on our website, some of the instruments list that there's not a need for that. So you don't need the accompanist. One of the other things I would say is, in addition to your etude and or OMEA solo that you're trying to prepare for your instrument, remember that some instrument faculty are going to ask that you also have the ability to play some orchestral and maybe even band excerpts. Right. So ask that question too. It's not a bad thing for you to explore those as well. And then I guess, I learned this from a colleague, our percussion professor, Dr. Snyder, who has his students in preparation for their recitals. They have to do their dress rehearsal as close to the time that they're actually going to perform. And they also have to wear the same exact clothes that they're going to wear for their performance. Yeah. And so the goal is that you actually wear and feel and do the same things you're going to do the day of the event. You've done it in a practice setting where you've maybe videotaped yourself or asked your parents to sit and be your committee and just sit and look at you and not say anything, to put yourself in the situation where you're creating the same environment so that by the time you get to the day of the audition, you've experienced this kind of heightened level of adrenaline.
Right. It's not foreign to you.
It's not foreign.
And it may sound silly to some folks. Really, I have to put the same clothes on I'm going to wear. I should do it at the same time of day. What if your audition is at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning? How often have you performed at that time of day? Probably not very much. And really, most musicians don't perform at that time of day anyways, but that's how the how it works when you do auditions and when you do solos at OMEA and different state contest levels. So put yourself in that position for success. Do everything you possibly can to prepare in order to have a successful audition and to feel comfortable throughout the process. Right?
And if you're thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't seem logical, what do you got to lose? Try it. You never know.
Right, yeah, and you'll be even, if there is a curveball thrown at you, you'll be more prepared to focus and handle what they're giving you that you're more prepared for because you've taken care of the rest of everything else.
Sure.
Right, instead of saying, oh, I didn't know they were going to ask me that, right? So, but it's okay, I can focus and deal with that because I'm prepared with everything else I've got going on so I can give it the due attention that it needs before I try to pull this off,
I have another one thought for you. I thought about this earlier today when thinking about our time together. We use it in our leadership training. The spheres of influence, and the center sphere says I can control, and the next sphere is I can influence, and then the outer sphere is I cannot control or influence. And what I would ask you to do is think about each part of your audition preparation, and especially the day of, and ask yourself, which sphere does this fit in?
Right.
How well you're prepared for the audition is in the sphere of you can control it. How the faculty respond to you is not in the sphere of you can control. So you shouldn't spend as much time worrying about it because it's in an outer sphere of I can influence it, but I can't control it. What's the weather going to be like? And what's the day going to be like from a scheduling standpoint? That may be in the sphere of you can't control or influence. So therefore, don't let yourself spend all of your emotional and intellectual energy worrying about those things that are in that outer sphere.
Absolutely.
I think we've found with our students in leadership training, but I think you can also apply this as a professional and as a student. If we all stop for a moment and ask ourselves, which sphere is this problem in? Sometimes we spend more time worrying about the items that are in that outer sphere of I can't control this and I really can't influence it. And if we would just spend the time worrying about the stuff that you can control, the other stuff will take care of itself.
Absolutely, yeah. And
I know that's a little generic to the process,
but it's like you said, there's some things you can't control in like the weather or whatever's going on, scheduling. If it changes, you can't control those things. So don't put too much time and energy in them, And the last thing I would say is have fun. Right, so this whole music thing that we do is supposed to be really fun. We're learning how to perform and influence people's emotions and reach out to people, whether it's through teaching it or performing it, and so really try to keep that in mind, and just have fun. It can be hard in an audition, because there's that that anxiety that's there, but just remember that your ultimate goal is to perform for those faculty members, and try to leave them with something that they're going to remember, Yep. And I think if you approach it from that standpoint, you may not be any more successful in doing it, but you're going to feel a lot better about what you did.
You have nothing to lose. I mean, ultimately, if you're really prepared and you're really committed to what you have to say musically and you're really passionate about that, chances are you're going to have fun as a byproduct of those things. I mean, you've done all the work. You've been passionate about how you're going to proceed with this, and you walk into the environment and say, you know what? I don't really know you. I'm going to play my heart out, and remember that the decision of whether to give you a scholarship or not is in the sphere of maybe I can influence, but more often than not, I can't control or influence it.
Right.
So I guess my last parting thing would be, if you haven't made a list of your 3 or 4 schools and tried to go and do a visit day where you get a private lesson with the faculty member, you shadow some of the students from their studio, you go to the studio class, you spend time in the environment, I think that's something that you need to do before you get to the point of trying to go for the scholarship audition. And the reason is, ultimately, the relationship you have with a private teacher is such an important one because, as we know, you in your 4 years of time having 30 hours of lesson a year, 15 weeks a semester, times 2 for the fall and spring semester, that's 120 hours in a private lesson in an office space with one other human.
Right.
Musically. You need to trust that person is the person that you really respect and that you enjoy being around and that you feel is going to be able to take you to the level that you want to be.
Right.
And remember that just because they're amazing doesn't mean that you're going to be amazing if you don't put the work in. But
absolutely.
But that's a relationship that's really important. And I think the second thing is to be around the other students in the studio and get to play in the ensembles gives you insight into what the atmosphere of the institution feels like.
Right.
And those are going to be able to answer some questions to you. I think most students innately will walk away going, that didn't feel right, or boy, that felt really good.
Right.
If you've had those experiences and you can answer some of those questions before you then make the decision about where do I want to audition, I think that's going to help you with the schools that you do decide to go to.
Right, because ultimately you're going to make the decision based off of your private lessons teacher. That should be probably your number one decision, influencer. And then, you may take schools off your list that you thought you were going to apply to that maybe I won't because I really didn't, I didn't get along with that professor or I didn't feel like there was a good connection there. So that's very important. So
sure.
That's
when you reach out to a faculty member, if there's not a lot of good communication, that's an indicator.
Sure.
And so those things are all going to...
You're auditioning the school just as much as they're auditioning you, right? Because you're going to spend so much time and money there. So it's important. So thanks so much, Galen, for being on.
Scott, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Good luck to everybody that's going through the process. It can be scary, but I think if you take some of these things to heart and work on how you prepare and remember to seize the opportunity and focus on the things you can control, I think everybody can walk away having a good, positive experience.
Agreed. Next episode, All Things Music, is going to be with a friend of mine named Stuart Friedman. He is a piano technician, and Stu is going to be talking about, hey, I'm a musician and I play, but that's not really my day job, right? How can you have a career in music that's not performing and not teaching? Right? What other avenues can you be involved in? Maybe it's the recording arts, maybe it's a piano technician or things like that, instrument repair. So there are many ways to do it. So he's going to be talking about that. He's also going to give us a couple tips and tricks to actually help if you own a piano to take care of your instrument in between tunings and things like that. So that'll be fun as well. So that's going to be coming up next. As always, if you have any suggestions for what you want us to talk about, please put them in the comments. And if there's anybody in particular that you'd like us to have on, put that in the comments as well, and I will try to do that. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.